I set out to find out how cheaply I could make a gaming machine. And going the traditional route of CPU, graphics card, motherboard, RAM, hard drive, maybe SSD, and then computer case was not exactly easy. The cheapest you could really get it down to was about $300, and then you'd have to spend another $100 or so on the operating system. Now you can get around the $100 operating system by going to kingwin.net and just picking up a CD key for Windows 10 for like $20-30, which is what I ended up doing. So we can cut that out of the equation, but it's still around $300 in parts, which not a lot of people have lying around. So I dug a little deeper, and after getting a cheaper graphics card, going down on RAM, getting the cheapest hard drive that I could find on Newegg, I finally had it down to about as cheap as I was willing to let it go. Now, the thing that really makes the build is this right here. It's essentially a laptop motherboard. It's an embedded solution. You can't remove the CPU. It's part of the board. Now, on sale, this is only $60. That's pretty good for a motherboard and CPU, especially a quad-core 2 GHz. Now, the real price is $75. That's with no sales whatsoever, so it's still pretty cheap. I sent them an email asking if they would send me a review sample, and they said no. So I just bought it. You do what you have to do sometimes. So moving on, I couldn't really figure out which graphics card I wanted to use. I couldn't afford the one that I wanted to put in there, which was the GTX 750 Ti, which is about $100. No, we had to go even cheaper than that. The R7 250 was the lowest I was willing to go. I've used an R7 240 before, and it wasn't bad at all, but it was only like $5 more for the 250, and the 250 had extra, I believe, twice as much RAM than the R7, so this one has 2 GB of VRAM, which, again, it's not bad. It's not a good card, but it'll do what we need it to do. So again, I sent them a email asking if I could get a review copy, and they said no, so I bought it. So with the main two parts taken care of, the next thing was RAM. I knew what I wanted for that. I wasn't willing to go below 8 GB. You could go down to 4, but you were not going to get a good gaming experience on just 4 GB of RAM. You're just not. So what I came up with was a single stick of budget edition 8 GB of RAM. The good news about this is it lets you upgrade in the future. If you wanted to put another 8 GB stick in, you could have 16 gigs of RAM. So for only $30, well, $28.99 if you want to get technical, for only $30, that's not a bad deal actually. So I emailed them asking for a review sample. They said no, so I bought it. At this point, I had run out of the budget for this experiment, and I still had extra parts to go. So this is the cheapest hard drive that you can really buy on Newegg and expect to actually use it. In the previous videos, I had a 80 GB hard drive that I got out of the trash, and I very quickly realized that once you put a couple games on there, that's it, you're done. That 80 gigs is way too small. 160 gigs is the bare minimum that you want for a build like this. You can't really go any less than that. So $15. I could have gone over budget and bought that, but luckily for me, I've got dozens of hard drives laying around, 250 GB each. So I popped one of those in there. The performance between this hard drive versus the one on the screen there is not going to be much at all, if any. So hard drive taken care of. What's next? Well, the DVD drive, of course. I still like my computers to have an optical drive. I use it quite often. I perhaps don't use it in the same way that most people would. I spend a lot of my time rescuing hard drives, which means I'll be putting in a CD with a Linux-based distribution that lets me go through each and every subdirectory. I also have a few programs that can scan for bad sectors and things like that. So I like to have a DVD drive on my computer. Plus it lets me play DVDs, all 3 of them that I own. But this is not required. I found this computer case originally on sale for $25, and it comes with a 480 watt power supply, which that's pretty respectable for a gaming rig. The one that we're building doesn't require any power whatsoever, so in reality you could go down to probably 250 watts, maybe even 200, without really even worrying about power. But this was the best one at the time, so currently it's on sale for $40 and full price is $50, but there are plenty of other ones that are full price $40 that come with built-in like 350 watt power supplies. So that's that. Plus it's red. It's pretty nice looking. After all was said and done, with every part, total came to $236. That's pretty good actually for an entire computer, every single component. Once I had the final price, I thought to myself, what can I do to make it go even lower? So I hit the bare minimum. If we take away the DVD drive and we take away the RAM, then we can add in a 4 gigabyte stick of RAM instead. Our new total, with tax, is $203. That is pretty darn good. Especially if you are able to find your computer case on sale. Now, I could not get a hold of that computer case because I didn't have $40 in my budget. I really was out. I couldn't justify spending any more money on this. So I reused one that I already had. Now, the reason that I say that you can go down to 250 watts, maybe even 200 watts, and still be perfectly safe, is because I went down to 250 watts in this case that I have here. It has a micro ATX power supply that only supplies 250 watts. And it really never even got close. The CPU on this board only uses 18 watts. That's pretty impressive for a quad-core 2 gigahertz. Essentially it is a laptop CPU, but hey, that's not bad. So, I did find a way to go cheaper. If we get rid of the graphics card altogether, you might think, how are you gonna use your computer? Well, this does have a onboard chipset. It's the Radeon HD 8400. It's not particularly good, but it's about on par with Intel's onboard graphics, which means you could play simple games such as Don't Starve together, you could play League of Legends, you could play some older games that are 3D. It's not bad, but it's not great either. So if you were on an extreme budget, you could pick up the RAM, the motherboard, and just all the rest and skip out on the graphics card temporarily, and your new total is only $140. Now let's get rid of that 4 gigabyte stick and go up to 8 gigs. once you get rid of that 4 GB stick of RAM and you go up to 8 GB, you're still only at $145. That's definitely doable if you're going to save up for the graphics card later. And if you do that, you can get the GeForce GTX 750 Ti that I had originally planned to put in this rig. Now it came time to benchmark it. Now, before we get started, I would like to remind you that the cheapest computer that you can build, traditionally, with all the parts separate, is around $300. You can go cheaper, but $300 is sort of the drop-off point. The moment you start going cheaper than that, you really start to lose a good gaming experience. It goes down fast beyond that point. Just for effect, here's the actual motherboard itself put next to the graphics card that's inside it. That's how small it is. The benchmarks weren't all that impressive for this PC, but then again, I wasn't really expecting them to be. The benchmarks for the garbage PC were about 900. The benchmarks for this one were about 1150, so small increase, but again, as I mentioned in the previous video, synthetic benchmarks can be misleading. The only way to really test this out was with games. I figured that Dark Souls 3 would probably be a good place to start, since the garbage PC, which didn't really score that far behind, could not play it whatsoever. Almost immediately, the computer showed the benefits of having extra cores versus higher clocked cores. The garbage PC could barely play it. We were getting low single digits FPS, and this computer, for the most part, seemed to be getting well above 30. Now, the garbage PC had 2 cores, clocked at 2.9 GHz, and this one has 4 cores clocked at 2 GHz. So, although the lower clock speed does hurt us quite a bit, the extra cores, you can really see just how much of a benefit those are in this game. The longer that I played, the more it seemed like we were getting upper 40s, possibly even 50s. I'm pretty sure we weren't getting a solid 60 FPS, especially in certain areas where it did dip down to the upper 30s, and the dip was noticeable. But for the most part, I would definitely classify this as a very, very playable experience, and in fact, an enjoyable one. And that is impressive. I'll go ahead and let the rest of this play out so that way you can actually judge for yourselves how good it looks. Now, for some reason, the computer decided this was the perfect time to bug me about driver updates. Moving on to the next game, I figured that Grand Theft Auto 5 would be the ideal game to let this computer really flex its muscles, even if those muscles are tiny. So tiny, in fact, that Grand Theft Auto 5 even warned me that my CPU did not meet the minimum specifications to run the game. And yet here we were playing the game with really no problem whatsoever. I'm gonna go ahead and let this play out, but I would like to point out one thing. This game was rendering in at 1280 by 1024. And I did notice that when you drove extremely fast, or when there was a lot of things exploding around you, the game would get a bit choppy. It wasn't unplayable, and in fact, it was actually still pretty good. But later on, when I lowered it down to, I believe I lowered it down to 800 by 600, the minimum that it would even let you do, it pretty much fixed all of those problems. I was going to test this on Rainbow Six Siege, but if I'm going to be completely honest, I forgot. But seeing as how it is now 4:30 in the morning when I'm finishing up this video, I am not going to go set up the computer again just to test it on that one game. I'd like to say that those two games, Dark Souls 3 and Grand Theft Auto 5, are pretty much proof enough that this game can handle just about anything you throw at it. It just might have to be run on the minimum or near to the minimum resolution and effects and all that. But then again, that's okay. I set out to build the cheapest gaming rig with all brand new parts. Nothing refurbished, nothing used, all completely brand new. And I'd like to think that I succeeded. That's a pretty solid show for this computer. Grand Theft Auto 5, 60 FPS most of the time. Same with Dark Souls 3. And I know for a fact that it could play Rainbow Six Siege if I were to go back and test it again. And with all that, I think that's about time to end it. It's getting late, and there really isn't much more for me to say other than bravo, this tiny little thing managed to pull through. Alright, thanks for watching. Have a good one.